Hello everyone and welcome to tonight on the topic of cultivation of medicinal cannabis or recreational cannabis, depending on who we speak to tonight. So you'll see a few different perspectives, and that cultivation process has been on my mind for a while as a pharmacist here working at Health House, and we're at the stage mostly where we see the finished and final product. So I can't wait to find out how it all begins from the plant itself. We'll also be recording this session tonight. So if you're joining us now, you can watch a little bit and escape later on, and we'll be uploading the whole session on YouTube later on in the week. And tonight, apart from covering cultivation, we're going all the way to Oregon in the US, and we'll speak to James firstly, who's running already a farm called Laughing Dog Farm, which is a licensed outdoor cannabis, recreational cannabis growing facility. We'll also be covering horticulture from a research scientist perspective, and Emily is kindly joining us tonight as well from Cannatrek, and she's filled a few of the queries I initially had about the environment and the suitable conditions of the plant, as well as how best to protect its growth. Finally, we'll also be covering some of the aspects of cultivation, particularly from an Australian company, Little Green Farmer, and Barb is also going to be joining us near the end to answer some of the questions. And we'll be touching on topics particularly with approvals, so things like the TGO 93, extraction procedures, and finally how the product reaches Australian nations. Importantly, after the 3 interviews, we'll have panel style questions where you'll be able to start submitting if you like now in the question and answer function at the base of your screen and as you listen. And try not to use that chat function, because we're not here just chatting about anything. We really want some interesting questions to cover tonight. So let's begin with our first interview with James, who will cover some of the aspects of that outdoor growing.
I'm here with James of Laughing Dogs Farm in beautiful Oregon. Hey James.
Hey everybody, how you doing?
And you've got a small greenhouse grow and an outdoor grow there. Give us a quick pan around. Tell us about what you got.
Okay. Should I switch the camera around?
Yeah, let's go for a walk.
So here we have, just in the kind of front of our greenhouse, a few plants in 5-gallon pots that we do R&D on, that we use different training methods or different stress methods or different media base or nutrient regimens or whatever to kind of improve our practices more over here. That is a special pot that I made with special ingredients for a contest plant. So, a lot of people will buy a clone, and then whoever grows it the best kind of wins the contest. So then we have, the rest of the greenhouse, the real production, 3 rows of 16 300-gallon pots. So over here we have 3 different feminized seed varieties from Mosca Negra breeder. Really, really nice, beautiful, healthy stuff here. And then we get a drop in height here where we start doing some clones. These are, what are these called? Tang breath, which last year we won 3rd place in the Oregon Growers Cup with this variety for best outdoor. And then we have some more clones down this row, probably 3 different varieties on this row, and another 3 different varieties on the next row, all from Stardust Cultivation, Oregon.
So how old are these plants?
How old are these? These were started in May. So that would be May, June, July, 3 months old.
Yeah. And is that what time you normally plant?
Yeah, sometimes we'll get started early and inside. You know, here it's really hard to get started too early because we have pretty bad weather in the spring. You know, really into mid-May often we'll have pretty bad weather, so it's a little harder to get started. But we have a couple of small Connex containers that we have some lights in, and we'll get things started in the containers. And then put them outside once there's, you know, kind of enough sunlight so they won't start flowering, and when the temp and humidity is a little bit nicer for them.
Yeah, and when do you normally harvest?
Usually just strain dependent, but usually things come down in October here. Some, you know, more sativa type stuff wants to go into November, and I do grow some of that stuff, but it's sort of masochistic because it's pretty hard to keep plants healthy in a really super cold, humid environment here. Some mold issues and such.
James, how long have you been growing cannabis?
Since 2016 was the first time, so not very long, but I love the plant, and I keep my nose in a book pretty much half the day, every day, learning more and more about it.
Yeah. And your plants, are they grown for rec or medical? I know you've got both there in Oregon.
Yeah, we're all rec, so everything here goes to the rec market. We don't have an Oregon medical license. We started year one with a medical license and then moved to a rec license after that.
Yeah. And I know you got amazing soils in Oregon.
Yeah.
Tell us about the soil you're growing.
I experiment a lot with different things. I've had, you know, plants that I've grown in sort of like cocoa-based soil. Most of the soil I grow in is, you know, actual soil. We've bought, you know, year one, we bought 100 yards or so of some soil from a company called Aurora. Makes a pretty good cannabis blend called 707. But since then, I've started just kind of making our own soil because, you know, this property is 115 acres and the farm itself takes up an extremely small piece of that. But the farm itself, you know, I can kind of give you a look out here, you know, goes very far into that forest, and we can gather pretty good soil from out there in that forest and mix that with what we had already. And then mostly we're using a lot of native soil with some like aeration amendments, whether that be cocoa or vermiculite or lava rock or something. And then, you know, just a really, really strong microbiological program. So we focus on compost teas, you know, my other company, Bioharmonic Tonic, which is a bottled microbe product, and really, you know, giving the plants their nutrition through a healthy soil food web and, you know, a healthy microbial biome in the soil and on the leaf surface.
Yeah. And I know you irrigate inside, but how about outside? Can you tell us about how often you have to water your plants and the life cycle there?
Yeah, so we have a drip tape irrigation system for our outdoor field. And so those those emitters are spaced at about a foot along the tape, and they drip at like 0.7 gallons per minute or something like that. So we will, depending on the time of year, have to irrigate more or less. You know, in the beginning, it's pretty low. We don't have to irrigate really more than 2 or 3 times a week. But then as plants get bigger and as it gets hot and they start to transpire a lot, sometimes we'll have to water a couple of times a day out in the field. And here in the greenhouse, you know, these pots are so big that we really only have to water them a couple of times a week. They hold their water pretty well.
And can you tell us about some of the extra nutrients you add to your crop? I know you've got the Bioharmonic Tonic, which is your product you've developed, but yeah, tell us a bit more about that.
My goal is to create soil that has everything in it, or find soil that has everything in it, and then introduce a really healthy microbiome so that those microbes can make all of those plant nutrients available. But if I feel like a plant needs something extra, all of the inputs that we will add are organic. Everything here is organic. So, you know, I may put in some feather meal or blood meal or alfalfa meal or something like that for things like nitrogen and, you know, iron and tricanterol and growth hormones and stuff like that that are naturally occurring in something like alfalfa meal or kelp meal. These sort of things I'll use if I feel like the soil needs a bit of a boost, or if the microbes aren't maybe at a population where they're cycling those nutrients well enough. So I'll sometimes add, actually there's some companies out there that make products that have these things pre-mixed. So they'll have like oyster shell flour and maybe some dolomite lime, maybe some gypsum, some bat guano, some seabird guano, some green sand, langbeinite, some of these things, glacial rock dust or azomite with a lot of the trace minerals and stuff. You know, they come pre-packaged, dry, already mixed, and that's a really easy way for an organic grower to just kind of top dress that, and not to worry about ratios of micro and macronutrients and stuff. I tend to just kind of mix it myself. It's a little cheaper, but it does take a little bit of calculation. You don't want to overdo any one and cause problems, because, you know, if you get a whole bunch of potassium or nitrogen or something like that, you know, these things compete for sites in the root zone, and sometimes can lock out other things like calcium, for instance. So yeah, it's just, most people I think make the mistake of putting too much stuff, doing too much on their plants. I always tell people the biggest mistake people make is too much love. You know, they think I need to be messing with this plant and watering it constantly and giving it so much food and everything because I want it to be huge and super thick buds and whatever, but they end up getting into trouble. You know, if you add too much nitrogen, you're just asking for bug problems and problems in general, and you know, the same goes for a lot of other nutrients. But the nice thing about an organic system with a really healthy microbe population is that the plant and the microbes have a chance to communicate with each other and kind of work out a delivery system, so that, you know, in contrast to like a synthetic nutrient regimen like a hydroponic grow, where you're sort of, whatever you put in, that plant is most likely going to have to take up because it's an ionic form. It's like force feeding. You can do it where you're not giving it too much, but it's a little bit harder. Whereas in an organic system, I think there's a little more forgiveness in that way, because these microbes are communicating with plants through exudates that the plants let out, which are, you know, starch, sugar kind of things, and they'll trade a microbe for, you know, some calcium or some boron or whatever it may be. So I feel like the plant in an organic system gets to choose what nutrients it takes up a little more so than in like a hydroponic system. Yeah.
So speaking of bugs, what do you do for bug control there?
We have a pretty strong predatory insect IPM regimen. So we generally every year here have to deal with things like thrips, aphids, sometimes spider mites, sometimes fungus gnats, you know, and so there's different biological and predatory products we'll use. Some of them may be fungal based or bacterial based, or some of them may be something like a parasitic wasp or a rove beetle or a predatory mite or things like that, you know. So we've been doing that for the last couple of years, so that now I don't really have to add anything to that system. So I mean, like if you look, I use these blue sticky tapes here to kind of give me an indicator of what's going on, and it's pretty clean, but I just took down the old one, which was completely covered in bugs. And it's like all kinds of bugs on there that you probably wouldn't want to see near your crop. However, you know, we don't really get any damage because I feel like our predators are taking care of them and keeping them in check without ever actually eliminating them. The predators knock the population down until they can't find them easily, and then they move on somewhere else, and then they come back when that population starts to build more pressure.
Yeah, excellent. Hey, thanks so much for your time today. I really appreciate the tour.
Absolutely.
Cheers.
Thank you, James. How insightful was that as well? We'll just play the next video shortly, but I was just amazed at the knowledge he has on nutrients.
How long have you been growing cannabis, and tell us about your qualifications?
Sure. So I'm a horticultural research scientist, and we're very lucky to have received our permits to begin growing about 12 months ago now. So we're a year in. We've learned a lot. It's a very exciting industry to be a part of.
And is sourcing the cultivars different, and do you have to separate the males from the females, or can you just get feminized seeds?
Yeah, sure. Look, definitely we don't want any males. So any males we find in the greenhouse or hermaphrodites, we definitely need to act quickly. You can definitely grow from feminized seed or from clones, but it's just the female cannabis plant that we're interested in for those buds.
Yep. And might be touching on a bit of IP here, but do you use soil or grown media, and can tell us about some of the nutrients you use?
Yeah, I think you'd find not many people growing in soil. So we're growing in koya, which is a coconut fiber. There's a lot of different nutrient recipes if you start to look around, but really, you know, you will vary the fertilizer that you want to provide to that plant at different life stages, but also different cultivars. So, you know, we're doing a lot of R&D here at our facility so that we can learn exactly what is the perfect nutrient recipe for different stages of life, but also for different cultivars.
And can you tell us a bit about the maintenance of the plants? For instance, how often do you water, and how often do you need to get out there with some nail clippers and give them a trim?
Yeah, sure. So they are definitely a labor-intensive plant. We do a lot of pruning. So you can see the ones behind me are just a couple of weeks off harvest. And we're still coming through again today to remove some more leaves. But it's very important because we don't apply any chemicals to our crop. It's very important that we provide the perfect environment. And by removing some of the leaves, but also making sure that the plant architecture is optimum, then we're reducing some of those pest and disease pressures. But we're also then looking at having a very easy time when it comes to harvesting and processing.
And I can see you're in a greenhouse. Is bug control a major problem, or can you exclude them?
Climate control, did you say?
Bug control, yeah. Excluding
bug control, definitely. So we do have our greenhouses fully screened, but they do make their way in. So we have a very strong integrated pest management program, or Ipm. So we do release a lot of beneficial insects. And as I mentioned before, we don't spray any chemicals. Everything that we use here is biological.
And what sort of lighting do you use? Do you use LED or HPS, high pressure sodium?
Yeah, so we'll use LEDs. So you can probably see just behind me, we've got the Philips LEDs in this greenhouse, but we've also got some other lighting trials using some other brand lights as well.
Excellent. Thank you so much for joining me today. I really appreciate the chat. Thank you very much.
No worries. Yes. Thanks, Paul.
Excited to be here with Barb from the Little Green Farmer in their brand new grow facility in a second location. It's really exciting to be amongst the plants, good life plants. You guys are about 2 years ahead of every other cannabis company in Australia. How have you done it? What skill set have people that have built this place and are running it?
Yeah, I think if there's one thing that we can say about Little Green Pharma is we are little, but we're also very agile in terms of the way that we've been able to develop our business. There's no one person at our company that does one job. We all do several jobs, and we do them, to the best of our ability. In terms
you've got about 10 jobs.
11 actually.
Yeah.
But in terms of, I think, the facility, the secret for us was really starting out very small. So we had a pilot facility, one room where we really did a lot of experimenting early on. I think having a grow room of that size, we were very lucky that the market demand wasn't that huge at that point. We wouldn't have been able to supply it. So with the market and with our ability to expand the facility into other rooms in this new build, we've been able to grow with the market. So and learn along the way.
Yeah, and there's so many different components to the plant, like lighting, airflow,
Oh my gosh.
pH levels, nutrients. And there's a number of different strains. But who works that out?
We have the secret workers that all have backgrounds in different types of horticulture and things like that. So we did start off with tomato plants very early on, but they worked out. They understood, I guess, the essence of growing, a plant, and the types of water, the minerals. I'm getting all that wrong, but in terms of all those different components, and I think it goes to the effect thing I talk about the difference between medicinal cannabis versus, say, street cannabis or illicit cannabis. Is everything you see here is controlled. The temperature is controlled, the humidity, the water, the nutrients. They test that constantly, constant. So it then makes for a much more refined.
That's right.
End product,
I suppose it needs to be reproducible for making medicine. For
Exactly.
chronic patients,
Yeah.
you can't afford to get it wrong.
Yeah, and and that's also a trade-off for the whole plant extract, because as you know, within that resin, there's over 500 active components, and you can't control for every single one of those in the grow. However, you can do your best to control that. It's really more consistent.
So it used to be manual the way it used to grow, but now it's evolved to this amazing new facility.
Yeah.
All stuff's automated.
Yeah.
Is it true someone can operate it full side from Broome?
Yeah, that's what they do. Yeah, it's all robotic. No, it's such an improvement in terms of where we've come from. But yeah, in terms of the way these tables move and the lighting can go up and down. That's all robotic and can be done remotely. But yeah, obviously still need people checking on it every day to go, is that reading correct? And they do cross checks on everything.
And you guys not only grow plants, you actually make the medicine, and from the actual plant and the leaf to actually the oil that you can currently sell and other dosage forms on the way. Just talk briefly about what's involved in that.
Yeah, it just being down here and going through the tour that we've just been through, it blows me away what is actually involved in growing these plants. I sometimes forget about that because I look at it from the point of harvest. We dry it. From that point, we send it off for TGO 93, so they're looking for things like aflatoxins, lead, all the, luckily, but what we do here is all, pesticide free anyway, but you still have to test for that. So that's the first step, is getting TGO 93. And then if you pass that, then you can extract the resin from the flowers. So that's another process. And then from there, we get that, we then decarboxylate, and then we test that. And then we get a read on the THC, CBD, minor cannabinoids, terpenes, those sorts of things. And then from there, we combine our resin to make the final product. And then we test it again. So it's not one stage. I think we've tested 4 or 5 times along the way. So yeah.
Thank you so much for your tour today. I really appreciate your time.
Anytime.
Answering some questions with you a little bit later. Thank you.
All right, now I'll invite all of the speakers for tonight, the panelists, to unmute themselves now, and we'll have a lovely question and answer session now. The listeners can still continue to ask the questions using that question and answer function button below. So we've only had a couple which have been, I guess, the topic of organically grown. Would you say, Emily, most of the Australian companies are aiming for that, or differently?
Yeah, look, organically grown is a little bit difficult in Australia, especially when it comes to hydroponics, which has nothing to do with cannabis. That goes across the board with horticulture. So you do have to be growing in soil to be able to get the organic certification. And I think you would find the majority of people in Australia won't be growing in soil. They'll be growing in a soil-less media, for example, like coir or rock wool, which some people don't necessarily consider as a hydroponic system, but it is. As Barb mentioned, and same with our facility, we don't apply any pesticides. So, you know, you don't have any of those chemicals going onto the crops, but it doesn't necessarily mean that the fertilizers are also organic. So yeah, it depends. I'm not aware of anyone in Australia doing it. And I think, you know, I'm only aware of one medicinal cannabis company that's actually certified organic overseas as well, although there definitely could be more of those, but I'm not aware of anyone in Australia who's attempting that at the moment. But I'm sure as the market matures, we will definitely see some diversification, and I think that would be a great marketing edge.
Yeah, absolutely. I guess, would you say that affects the plant itself in terms of output of what you end up getting as a company, or it's more to do with, is it consistency over time where you choose something where it's hydroponic because you know what you're controlling going in?
Yeah, look, that's a really good question. I think when it comes, you know, when you start looking at agriculture and horticulture in general, it's really important that you're not organic by neglect. So what, you know, it's one thing to not want to apply any of those chemicals, but you know, you can still have a really fantastic crop and be very limited in your use of any chemicals. So I think, you know, looking at more of that biological farming, and James definitely mentioned a lot of that earlier on when he was talking more, you know, more about some of the, you know, adding the life to the soil. So while we're not organic, you know, we're also applying a lot of biologicals, you know, into our growing media, but also different types of things that you can use, like as biological insecticides that are actually natural living organisms. So not chemicals at all. So I think what's important is that you grow to the best of your ability and have that more biological farming sort of approach, as opposed to trying to be strictly organic.
Yeah, that makes sense. I don't know if Barb is available as well, but I'll start off a question to, hello, how are you? So a question towards you in terms of, I guess, how do you control the ratio of cannabinoids in a crop with, say, CBD and THC? Emily, feel free to jump in as well. Oh, sorry, Barb, we can't hear you yet, but maybe we'll soon. Maybe Emily, you start, if you like to, I guess, touch on the topic of how do you control.
Yeah, look, yeah, obviously the growing climate can definitely have an impact on your cannabinoid content and the time that you harvest. So it's really critical, of course, that you're planning that harvest when the plant is really ready and optimum. So providing those perfect conditions, you know, as I mentioned, you know, in the pre-recording, you know, we're doing a lot of R&D at our facility. What we're looking at, you know, is to be growing from clones. So selecting, you know, the best phenotypes so that you can remove a lot of that variation. And then of course, growing indoors where you can control the microclimate as well, so that you can have that repeatability. Obviously, you know, we want patients to be receiving, you know, the exact same profile every time. But we also want to make sure that what we're producing is repeatable and is easily within the specs on the label, so that if we're selling a certain product, then every single time that we have that product available, you know, it's as close to spec as possible. But it is a natural product, and so there will be some variation. But we do have a little bit of leeway, you know, with the labeling with the TGA in Australia to account for that being a natural product.
Yeah, that makes sense. Could you clone forever? Or is that possible?
Oh yeah, definitely. I mean, the mother plants definitely have a lifespan, but you know, you just clone them. So, you know, so generally people will keep their mother plants for about 4 months up to 6 months, and then replace them. And again, it depends on the cultivar as well.
Yeah. Okay.
Has Barb got her audio happening?
I think. Can you hear me?
Yes. Yep.
Yeah.
Okay. Cool.
That's all
Sorry,
right.
guys. I'm literally driving back from our grow facility, so
No,
I'm
thank
on the side of the road.
Maybe I guess a question for you, Barb, then, in terms of has your company considered growing outdoors compared to indoors? And I guess the question is mainly about consistency again. Is that a big criteria that a lot of businesses have to make here in Australia?
Yeah, look, it's definitely something that we considered you know, because as you know, we've just expanded the facility. So our new facility can now produce, I think, 110,000 bottles per year, which is a big improvement on where we were. I guess in the difference, what Emily said, it's really around trying to keep that consistency for the plant. So we control, being indoors, you're able to control everything from the lighting to, you know, the nutrients, the water we, you know, filter and then put the nutrients in that are required. And you can control the humidity and all those sorts of things. So from a consistency perspective, as long as we're looking at the medical space, for us, we'll continue to focus indoor just for those reasons, to give us better consistency.
Yeah, yeah. Makes sense as well. I guess the question could be for both of you as well from Liesl, and what they've asked is in terms of preparation for trials, do your companies take part of that, or are you prepared to as well do trials on new products itself, apart from, I guess they mean your own?
So Little Green Pharma we're currently supplying product for 3 trials. So one of them is our own and then 2 external. So we are actively doing that. One of them is placebo. So yeah, that's something that we actively do, and that's using whole plant extract. And
yeah, and I'd have to, you know, agree with Barb on that. You know, at Cannatrek, we're also, you know, getting involved in clinical trials, whether they're our own trials or just sponsoring and providing the medicine, because, you know, it's an area that we're really lacking in. So we need, you know, a greater body of research so that we can give our doctors more confidence and make sure that we're providing the correct medicines to patients for different indications. So we've definitely got a really strong R&D focus all the way from seed to patient, so that, you know, agronomic research trials in the greenhouse, all the way through to the clinical trials.
And then we here at Health House also help deal with distributing those products in terms of trials. And it's really exciting to hear that more and more is happening, which is so important for research, particularly in Australia, to spread the word and the efficacy behind the drug itself. I had a question in terms of cleaning and sanitation and what that process looks like. I guess if you can give a brief summary, Emily.
Yeah, sure. Look, cleaning and sanitation takes a lot of time. You know, so I think, as like we all have mentioned, you know, we don't apply any pesticides, so that's insecticides and fungicides. So obviously controlling the climate is really important, but controlling your hygiene. So, you know, you would have seen Barb in the video earlier, as well as myself. You know, there's a lot of PPE. So we're trying to keep a lot of things out. But at the same time, you know, we've got some pretty strict programs to ensure that, you know, that we're not having any of those issues in the greenhouse, so that we don't have, you know, mold issues or insects or anything like that. So it's definitely something that we have to focus on. And so the sanitation, you know, is very strict when it comes to hygiene. Very, very strict.
And so it should be, I guess, because
yep.
At the end of the day, people are ingesting this. Barb, for you, I have a question in terms of how cannabinoids are extracted from the plant. I know a lot of companies do it a different way. What is one way that you guys do it?
Yeah, so probably the two most common extraction methods are CO2, so supercrit or ethanol. So we have the ability to do both. At the moment, it's more ethanol, so it's soaking the flower in basically alcohol to extract the resin, and then we cleanse that through a heating process. Is what we're doing at the moment.
Emily, is yours similar process or a little bit different?
Yeah, so we're going to be providing both. We're currently not extracting ourselves until we finish building our facility for extraction. So we're just focused purely on the cultivation and research side at the moment. So we've got some downstream partners doing our extraction for us, and then we're also focused on actually producing the dried flower as the finished product, as well as the oils for extraction.
Yeah, the part before
Mm-hmm.
the extraction step. Yeah. Okay. In terms of the plant itself with strains, is that a choice that cultivators get to decide upon in Australia, or do you have to choose a particular strain?
Yeah, look, we're definitely a little bit limited in Australia when it comes, you know, to the different genetics that we have access to. Obviously, we need to source them from legal sources, which, you know, so looking to Europe and Canada and countries like that. It's a little bit unfortunate that in Australia we haven't had an amnesty to bring in some illicit genetics, which they had in Canada when they started the medical industry. They had that in Europe, in the Netherlands. We've got our, you know, our neighbours in New Zealand at the moment also have an amnesty to bring in these illicit genetics in. So it's a little bit disappointing that we don't have that opportunity in Australia, because obviously I can source illicit genetics that have come through an amnesty in a different country. Technically, you know, you could get seeds in through New Zealand's amnesty, you know, and then bring them to Australia. And I just don't think that's the correct process. But in saying that, there is, you know, a lot of genetics available and different cultivars, but it's definitely not a level playing field when it comes to accessing those. But for us, you know, we're really focused on R&D as well. So we're looking forward to, you know, our, you know, the results of our own breeding program so that we can actually create, you know, some of our own proprietary genetics as well. But, you know, as a researcher, Canatrex brought in 20 different chemovars to begin with. And so we've got, you know, a pretty good genetic pool, and we're always on the lookout to see, you know, what other interesting varieties people have, whether that's in Australia or around the world. And with a growing legal market, it's actually just really exciting, you know, to see all the work that people are doing and the different genetics that are available.
Yeah, I guess the genetics and varieties endless ongoing. Barb, I had a question as well in terms of, I guess quality control was a topic that someone has asked about. You spoke a little bit about certain things after cultivation. What would you comment on that, and how Little Green Farmer does that step of quality control?
Yep. So I guess in terms of quality control from a grow perspective, similar to what Emily said around, I guess, the process of the grow, like that's all extremely controlled. We're also constantly trialing different lighting, different, you know, temperatures, and we've had the luxury of time because we've been doing it for, you know, 2.5 years now. So that's been great. We've learned a lot through that. In terms of, I guess, the quality side, so we do use cloning, so you're more likely to get, you know, a consistent output from the flowers. But the other side of it, which Emily also touched upon, is when you're using a whole plant extract, you know, you're obviously trying to control for your THC and your CBD, but there's also another there's a total of 144 known cannabinoids, plus terpenes, plus flavonoids. So there's over 500 active ingredients that you're trying to control for, which you can't do because it's a plant at the end of the day. And despite, you know, having all things equal, there's still going to be some variation, and patients experience that. So that's, I think, a natural part of cannabis plant medicine that's the reality across the globe.
Team of ingredients to control, not just...
Yeah, but in terms of, I guess, the testing of it, so people are curious about that. So there's really 3 testing phases. So there's the first one is TGO93 on the flower. So that's looking at, you know, looking for things like aflatoxins, you know, other like molds, pesticides, heavy metals, things like that. So that's the first test that we need to pass. Once we pass that, we're then able to extract. So then we'll, you know, use the CO2 or the ethanol extraction, get the resin. We then test it again, and that stage is more to see what the active THC and CBD are, as well as the minor cannabinoids we'll also test for, and some of the terpenes. And then using that resin, we then turn it into a finished product, and then we test it again, because then it's got to be plus or minus 10%. So that's the third test, and we also have to do at that stage what's called TGO 100, which is then also testing for any microbial issues with the plant. So there's really, I guess, 4 phases of testing to bring a product to market.
Yeah, definitely stages. I guess a question towards you, Emily, as well is, what if one of those stages did go wrong in terms of where you identified an outbreak, for example, a type of disease, or you noticed a too high level of a particular ingredient that you don't want there? Are there certain strategies that you would undertake, or like a plan developed already?
Yeah, definitely. Look, we have a very strong IPM program, so integrated pest management. So the way that we work is more in a preventative approach as opposed to a curative. So we have a regular release of beneficial insects, you know, that work as predators to make sure that we never have an outbreak that gets out of control. And then, of course, you know, when you're growing indoors, you can really control the microclimate. Barb mentioned a little earlier about, you know, how we can control the temperature, the humidity, the lighting. So we're really able to provide these optimum, you know, this optimum microclimate in the growing area, which means that, you know, you're not providing those environmental conditions where mold spores want to germinate. Of course, things can go wrong. So we have a very, you know, plant monitoring is really important. So, you know, to make sure that you pick up on things really early. And so some of that could just be, you know, if you found a leaf that had a small amount of powdery mildew on it, then it's really easy. You're just removing that one leaf and then you're increasing that monitoring. And that's, you know, that's part of your integrated pest management program. And then, as I mentioned before, you know, we're releasing a lot of beneficial insects, as well as, you know, applying foliar sprays and things like that are actually, you know, boosting the plant's immune system, so to speak, you know, and actually, you know, providing that preventative as opposed to a curative. But then we've got, you know, we've got programs in place that if we find a small outbreak of a particular pest or disease, you know, we've got a very strict protocol of how we deal with that. Because again, you know, we're not like conventional farming where they can reach for chemicals and just nuke their whole crop. It's not an option. And it's actually a really fantastic way of growing. You know, it's great for the plant, it's great for the staff, it's great for the environment. You know, it's the way you want to be growing.
Absolutely, yeah. I had another question in terms of preference for propagation methods. I guess I'll start with you again, Emily, first, because I noticed later when we come to you, Barb, how the video of the location was a green screen pretty much, and whether that helps the plants grow a little bit better compared to the top light effect, as some would have seen in Emily's video. So is there a difference between the lighting and growth or propagation for those types of plants? Or
yeah, look, we provide a slightly different conditions depending on the age of the plant. You can propagate from seed or from clones, from vegetative cuttings. And then, of course, as the plant's advancing through the different plant stages, they're going to need, you know, different amounts of nutrients and water and light and slightly different temperatures and relative humidity. So when we're cloning, of course, we've got really high humidity for our clones. And then by the time we're getting into flowering, you know, we've got to make sure that the humidity is a lot lower, so that we're not providing that kind of microclimate that fungal spores would, you know, would be germinating and growing in. So we're definitely tailoring the microclimate to the different growth stages. Obviously, you know, our setup's a little bit different to Barb's because we grow in a greenhouse, so we utilize the natural sunlight, but we supplement with LED lighting. And so it's, you know, it's a little bit of a different setup, the way that we're growing, but we do take advantage of, you know, the huge amount of natural sunlight that we have here in Queensland, but also in Australia. So I think it's, you know, it's really about tailoring, you know, to the way, you know, to the particular plant life stage, but also the way that, you know, your facility is growing. So whether it is indoor or outdoor in a greenhouse, you know, the height, the amount of time you're going to let your plant be in veg We've got blackout screens so that we can, switch them over into flowering when we want. So it is really a highly controlled environment. And I think you'd find that for the majority of facilities in Australia, I don't think anyone's really mastering the outdoor in Australia just yet. But I definitely see a lot of benefits of growing either in a greenhouse or indoors. It's your insurance policy. You can provide the perfect climate all year round and supplement with lighting or blackout, your temperature, your humidity. Yeah, it's a fantastic insurance policy to make sure that nothing goes wrong.
Yeah, at the same time, so many factors to consider. Yeah. Barb, is your similar situation in terms of propagation? Yeah.
Yeah, it is. And I think another interesting thing that I didn't realize until we got into the actual growing phase is and Emily touched upon it, is the plant height. So now that we're in our new facility, which is much bigger, and we've got more space per plant, we're now trying to train our plants so that they're growing all flowers at the same height. Because if you let a plant grow too tall, and then you've got, some at the top getting light and the flowers in the middle aren't getting as much light or as much exposure, you're going to get variability within that cannabinoid, the cannabinoids of those flowers, even though it's in a controlled environment. And that's another really interesting thing. There's studies that show that you get up to 30% variation from a flower on the top of a plant to the side or the bottom. So that, again, that's something that you need to be really cognizant of around growing. And now that we're in a bigger facility, we have the luxury to be able to do that. And that's quite common, which is also, I think, another interesting aspect of it.
Absolutely. I feel like there's so many more questions to ask, but I'm going to have to cut it short there. And thank you both, Emily and Barb, for joining us. I'm sorry James couldn't, but fair enough. It's probably quite late for him in the US right now. I'll just mention in terms of our next webinar as well, it's going to be upcoming in about 3 weeks on the 23rd of September, and that will cover a few different prescribers, Dr. John Tay, Dr. Orit Holtzman, and Dr. Maddie Moore, who will cover their perspective on prescribing medicinal cannabis. So we'll send out a link about that shortly. And this video itself was recorded, so we'll post that on our YouTube channel and send you a link as well for that. And I really hope that everyone has enjoyed a really insightful session about cultivation. So thank you again, everyone.
Thanks, Sonia.
Thank you.
That's all right. Have a good night.
Bye.